So I told Margaret Jensen that I was not afraid of her when she and her girl gang cornered me under the slide in the park. Afraid of her, but I was. Afraid of her, that is. But either I hid it well or she had bigger fish to fry, because I escaped a beating with my 8-year-old bluff. Don't let them see your fear, they told me. So I didn't. Still don't. But I have them. Fears, that is. As do you. And they may change with the years, even lessen with the years, but none of us lives fear-free. The monsters under the big bed become the monsters in the bed, whether it is the hospital bed, the hospice bed, or the bed your mother told you about when she said, "You make it, go lie in it." Fears of falling metastasize over time into fears of failing. And for every grizzled veteran who is afraid to leave this world, there are 2 rookie lovers who are afraid to bring a child into it. At a social event at the School of Theology recently, several of us were talking about our fears. I told them that my brother gave my nephew a spin around the Daytona track. Really? And he said, "Oh yeah, I've done that." You get in that car and you find yourself going around that track, watching the speedometer climb to unheard of levels. A student recalled being in a hiking group on a mountain with increasingly treacherous levels of footing. So Steve's concern was speed. Anne's was heights. One or the other of which causes butterflies to fly in most every stomach here. That and snakes. During my first week as the director of children's ministries, I made an assumption about the fear of snakes. 10 of us, staff and parents, were responsible for 70 children at summer day camp. This was the day of the crawdad races, where we were racing those critters on the banks of the creek that ran through this Tennessee state park. The family groups were racing their crawdads against each other in the elimination rounds before the semifinals, the playoffs. I just happened to turn and glance downstream to see the triangular head of a cottonmouth water moccasin, about 3 feet long, making its way upstream toward our racetracks. Assuming fear, I yelled, "Snake!" and pointed. All of the adults backed up slowly. All of the children ran toward the snake. Lessons learned. First, when responsible for the safety of others, anticipate danger and teach appropriate response. Second, no snake, not even a viper, can hang around when 70 children run toward it screaming. That snake's eyes grew twice their size before it went underwater again. Many of you tell me that you are afraid to do what I'm doing right now, speaking in public. For you, the microphone is the wiliest serpent that the Lord God ever made. You'll do anything at St. Luke's, anything, as long as it doesn't involve speaking, which I can understand. For 30 years now, there has been a generous proportion of fear and trembling each time I occupy this space. And sometimes I think I ought to walk onto the platform barefoot, just to remind myself that this is holy ground and we are in the presence of the Holy One. Fear comes naturally to all of us, but should it come spiritually to all of us? Some would say so. Maybe you would say so. The question arose in my rabbi-pastor Bible study several months ago as we were talking about the concept of hell, which is found in both the Christian and Hebrew traditions. I posed the question, to what degree can folk be frightened into faith? Well, they said they were sure it could be so for some. They were equally aware, both pastors and rabbis, of congregations within Christianity and Judaism where the pastor or rabbi might indeed be labeled chief fright instructor. I shared this little ditty from a friend's childhood. This was Susan. I went to her church a lot. When she was in the 6th grade, Susan recited this ditty with gusto, with the gusto of an NFL cheerleader. She said, "Get a little fear of the Lord in 'em. Give 'em hell from time to time. Singe the fringe of their securities. Kick a few posteriors for God." She did it better than I did, thank goodness. Our Bible study group quickly concluded that they did not want to do that, kick a few posteriors for God. But some of them did say that long ago they had left synagogues and congregations who were, quote, into that. Moreover, it didn't seem as if any of them had come closer to God, to Jesus, to faith, to community as a result of the fear factor. I mean, if fear could really motivate the faithful, you'd think that one person over my years, just one person, would have had heaven slipped into her as a result of having hell scared out of her. I mean, wouldn't you think just one person? But no one has admitted such to be the case. Not a single one. Making me wonder whether fear works for anybody. The reason I said that fear does not enhance spirituality is that fear blocks intimacy. If we're afraid of something or someone, we don't get close to them. Instead, we withdraw. Consider animals. Since I've been to the National Western Stock Show, where I watched the dogs herd sheep. So I'm thinking about domestic animals, dogs and cat-type animals. When we are little, we're curious about such animals and drawn to them, and so our parents instruct us as to how we should behave around them. Touch them here, don't touch them there. Don't stick your fingers in their eyes or hit their heads with little toy hammers. Scratch them under their chins, don't yank their tails. Run and play with them, but don't try to saddle and ride them. But in the stupidity of our innocence, we break the rules and suffer the consequences. Kitty scratches, Rover bites. We get hurt to the point of tears. And if such wounds be inflicted often enough and severely enough, fear sets in, and fear forces us away from Kitty, away from Rover, away from any four-legged hairy critter that looks like Kitty or Rover. So what's the antidote? Converting fear into respect. Respect. That's the antidote. Learning what we can do in relationship and what we can't do. So that in the language of the late Dr. Doolittle, we might become one with the animals. Fear, no. Respect, yes. It's the difference between unconditional love and a debilitating anxiety. So that same day, one of the rabbis brought up the subject of fathers, and I don't know what got us to talking about fathers. Maybe it was the use of the pronoun he in the creation stories that we were studying, but we did, which led one of the pastors to describe her father as somewhat frightening, not because of his physicality, but because of his unpredictability. He drank, not always, but always too much, which meant that as a child, she never knew what he was going to do, what he was going to say. So she kept her distance from her father out of fear, to protect herself. And then her father died one day before they had a chance to become close, which led one of the rabbis to talk about his father, who was stiff, he said, stern, he said, not to be ignored, disobeyed, or otherwise messed with, he said. But then he added, even though we respected him, we were never afraid of him. There was never a moment's doubt in our minds that he loved us very much. So respect, because respect keeps us connected, humble, and gracious. But do not fear, because fear keeps you distant. As I prepared for Christmas and Epiphany this year, I noticed that the nativity stories are laced with admonitions for people to not be afraid. Every time an angel shows up to tell anybody anything, the first words are, "Fear not." The angel says it to Zechariah, Mary's cousin-in-law. The angel says it to Joseph, Mary's betrothed. The angel says it to the shepherds, Mary's stablemates. The angel says it to Mary herself. Fear not, the angel says. Meaning that if anything is going to happen here, if the story is going to advance, if the connection and the covenant is going to unfold, if anybody is going to get close to anybody, fear has to be taken off the table. Until fear gets moved, Zechariah isn't going to get close to Elizabeth. Joseph isn't going to get close to Mary. Mary isn't going to get close to God. And the shepherds aren't going to get close to Jesus. And the whole thing is going to break down. The biblical linguists tell us that the words "fear not" are simply a sign when we're reading that says, listen, God is present and acting. God is here and acting in the story. We understand this as a result of our being willing to stand under the relationship with the grace that is always ours. In the garden, Jesus prays under this grace. Never before have we seen Jesus so anxious, so despairing. Something terrible is going to happen. Jesus knows it. The disciples are beginning to comprehend it as well. And yet the next day in Governor Pilate's courtroom, the prisoner is neither shaking with fear nor begging for mercy. He is free, released from that paralyzing fear. It is settled in the garden, not what I want, but what you want. Leaning in, trusting in that relationship that has proven worthy for a lifetime. Luke is the only storyteller that adds this note in the account of Jesus praying in the garden. I love this. Luke says, "Then a heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him." Can you hear it? Jesus, fear not, for I am with you. Don't be afraid, for I am your God. Jesus cast himself upon the wisdom and the will of God. And curiously, it is the governor, the powerful man Pilate, who is visibly agitated. His wife tells him this troublesome dream that she has had about Jesus, and Pilate's better instincts are battling his ambition and losing. So in this pitiful gesture, he washes his hands in public, trying to absolve himself of any responsibility. Poor man. Which leads me to a story about fear and faith. It's probably my transforming story. Some of you have heard it before. It concerns the day I was called to the office of the principal at the new West Springfield High School. I had never been called to the office of the principal. This was not good news. It was the fall of my junior year. The principal's name was Larry Hammond. He was an old man, about 115 years old. He was a tall man, about 7'4", and a solemn man. He smiled once every 2 months. He sent for me by way of a note channeled by my teacher. Called me right down, he did. Ushered me right in, he did. And on his desk, which separated him from me, sat this big open book. And it was turned to a page. Even reading it upside down, I could see that that page was headed with a name. Forbes, comma, Janet Lynn. Noting my nervousness, he told me that I had nothing to fear. Yeah, right. I hadn't done anything wrong. What he wanted me to do was more that was right. Charged with launching this new high school, he was looking for leaders. He told me that I had been nominated by my teachers to be one of his interns. Mr. Hammond admitted that he was surprised by the nomination because I seemed somewhat shy, painfully shy, somewhat fearful. And so he asked me directly if I would be willing to go beyond whatever barriers caused me to hang back. Would I risk speaking up? Would I help him create a culture of excellence and service? Well, warming to his task, he continued with another incentive. 8 months from now, Ms. Forbes, you are probably going to be applying to schools, and you are going to want my help. And I would love to be able to offer it. I just want to be able to glow about your leadership. There is no reason, Ms. Forbes, that you cannot give me what I need and more. Now get out of here and do the work that needs to be done so that 8 months from now, I can do mine. Yes, sir, I said. And with my heart pounding in my throat for most of the next 2 years, I said yes to leadership in student government, in service organizations. I even lettered in basketball. Oh, clumsy me, you can't. Oh, my. I never forgot him. In fear and trembling, I answered his summons, and I left his office holding my future in my hands. What are our stories except those awesome, life-changing moments when the high and holy principle of the universe does the same for us? Not by calling us into the office and scaring us witless, but by coming to us, to our homeroom, and placing the future in our hands. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's great pleasure to give you the kingdom. Everything. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, giver of life, give us the faith to trust you. We can look back and see the ways in which you have led us and loved us in the past. And yet we are so often reluctant to trust you with the future. We often see our world as threatening and frightening, rather than seeing a world full of possibility and wonder. Come to us in this silence as we name the fears from which we pray release.